If you've ever watched a historical epic, you know what a medieval siege looks like. You have sprawling cities of perfectly aligned, color-coordinated tents, commanders dramatically bellowing the word fire as thousands of arrows black out the sun, and massive wooden towers rolling effortlessly right up to the castle walls. But those images are carefully constructed myths. Actual medieval warfare was a grueling, filthy, and agonizingly slow test of human endurance. To see what it actually took to breach a fortified city, we need to walk through a historically accurate siege step by step. We are going to look at the terrifying realities and tactical miseries that the movies deliberately leave out. When we strip away the heroic choreography, what remains is the brutal math of attrition. Starving out the enemy, or simply surviving the elements, dictated the winner long before the first sword swung. The reality of an attacking army's encampment begins with basic economics. Those uniform, colorful tents you see on screen were extreme luxury items. A modest tent could cost a foot soldier half a year's wages, meaning they were reserved almost exclusively for high-ranking knights and wealthy nobles. For the vast majority of the army, shelter meant whatever they could build from the surrounding environment. Common soldiers spent weeks, sometimes months, living in crude mud hovels, makeshift lean-tos, or simply sleeping in open foxholes dug directly into the earth. When thousands of men live in dirt holes for months, waste management becomes practically non-existent. Rain turns the camp into a stagnant marsh of mud and excrement, creating the perfect breeding ground for severe infections like cholera and dysentery. This chart shows the grim statistical reality of a prolonged siege. As the timeline of the standoff extends, the casualties from disease completely dwarf the fraction of soldiers who died from actual combat. You were far more likely to die from severe dehydration in a latrine trench than from an enemy arrow. The highest death toll of a campaign usually occurred before the army even approached the castle gates. Basic camp sanitation, it turns out, was a much more critical survival tool than a suit of armor. When an attacking army finally marched on the fortress, Hollywood typically shows them sprinting across a vast, flat plain directly to the base of the stone walls. The real landscape looked entirely different. Castles were surrounded by massive artificial ravines called defensive ditches, often filled with sharpened wooden stakes or stagnant water. Before anyone could even touch the castle wall, the attacking army had to manually fill this massive gap. Soldiers had to haul dirt, rocks, and timber into the ditch by hand, undertaking weeks of agonizing labor while constantly exposed to arrows and rocks raining down from the defenders above. This treacherous terrain is exactly why those cinematic siege towers rarely rolled directly up to the ramparts to drop a drawbridge. The uneven, freshly filled ground couldn't support the immense weight. Instead, these wooden towers were usually pushed as close as the ditch allowed, acting as stationary sniper platforms to give attacking archers a height advantage. Castle defense relied heavily on intense environmental manipulation. By digging these trenches, defenders forced the attacking army into narrow, slow-moving bottlenecks where they were completely exposed. We must rethink siege engines. Cinematic catapults are shown shattering stone defenses into rubble, but as this diagram shows, their trajectory wasn't built to level masonry. Instead, commanders aimed higher, lobbing flaming debris and rotting carcasses over the walls to spread panic and disease. If a direct infantry assault was ordered, attackers faced horrifying odds. This medieval manuscript illustrates the near-suicidal reality of mass scaling. Attackers climbing ladders arrived at the top one by one, completely off balance and vulnerable. And while movies love to show defenders dumping boiling oil on them, oil was far too costly and dangerous to handle over an open flame. Defenders utilized much cheaper, effective torments. They hurled heavy rocks, dropped corpses to spread disease, poured boiling water, and scattered quicklime, a powder causing severe chemical burns. They even dumped heated sand, which easily slipped through armor gaps and burned the skin directly. Meanwhile, archers providing cover fire operated under strict limitations. The draw weight of a medieval warbow was between 100 and 200 pounds, making it physically impossible to hold a drawn arrow for dramatic tension. The motion of drawing and releasing had to be one fluid action, and no commander yelled "fire," a term that didn't exist until muskets. The command was knock, draw, loose. Furthermore, flaming arrows were rarely used, as wielding open fire in tightly packed ranks was a massive liability to the attacking army. Surviving an assault on the walls required no graceful swordplay. It meant enduring a sustained barrage of crude environmental hazards while trying not to fall to your death. If the historical reality of siege warfare involves complex engineering, terrifying biological tactics, and grueling endurance, why does the film industry continually scrub it clean? It comes down to the mechanics of storytelling. Films require fast pacing, visually distinct choreography, and satisfying narrative payoffs to keep modern audiences entertained. Watching soldiers dig a trench in the mud for 3 straight months simply doesn't fit into a 2-hour runtime. A few modern historical epics have certainly aimed for brutal authenticity, dragging the camera through the mud to expose the dehumanizing horror of combat. But the vast majority of cinema still default to stylized, sanitized tropes. True history rarely fits into a neat 3-act script. But when we confront the grueling reality of stone, sinew, and disease, we strip away the fantasy. What we are left with is a much more profound respect for the true horrors our ancestors had to endure.